Hello, I'm just going to introduce ourselves before Jeannie delivers the presentation. We're a team from Mott MacDonald, and we decided to present on autonomous vehicle readiness in rural UK. But the point of this presentation is not to say that in rural areas you need to have autonomous vehicles in the future, but it's to say that if the direction of future mobility goes towards blurring the lines between rural and urban transportation, then what are the challenges associated with the rural environment that we need to consider to make that possible? So, Jeannie?
Thank you, Jannat. So, hi everyone, thank you for this opportunity. So let's just go through our slides. So the agenda for future mobility is actually to reduce the level of congestions by reducing vehicles, but whilst maintaining and or increasing mobility of people. So how we want to achieve that is to use connected autonomous vehicles, or CAVs for short, which basically are vehicles with embedded electronics which allow it to communicate with other vehicles. But not only that, we also need to have the infrastructure in place, infrastructure that's part of a larger network, so that it allows or is able to communicate and to transfer any real-time information with the vehicles that are traveling through it. So in developing our transport vision, we tried to consider and question ourselves whether or not if it's feasible to actually implement autonomous driving in rural areas, and if so, will the deficiencies of the infrastructure pose as a hindrance? And also if transforming the roads would essentially blur the line between urban and rural areas. So we hope that we can achieve or cover or address these issues with our transport vision. So what is our transport vision? Our vision is a future where modes of transport can operate seamlessly between urban and rural environments to create safer transportation and filling in the gaps in the network. So just a bit of background. In the UK, the urban landscape accounts for approximately 10%. In England, less than 5% in Wales, less than 2% in Scotland, and less than 4% in Northern Ireland. So that essentially means that 93% of the UK is not urban. And this map just basically shows the distribution of rural and urban areas in the UK. And we can see that about 30 to 40% of the population resides in these rural areas. Over the years, the government has led a number of initiatives to conduct more research into autonomous vehicles. And this year, there's been funding of projects to simulate, model, develop, and test the safety of autonomous vehicles. And in the next 3 years, there's plans to review the laws to fully understand how we can launch autonomous vehicles on the roads by 2021. And the aim, I suppose, moving forward is to introduce autonomous driving on roads and on buses, and eventually by 2040, hopefully, that 95% of new vehicles sold in the UK would be fully autonomous. So now that we've a bit of background, we want to just touch upon the 5 challenges that we have identified that is relevant in the rural area. So the first is the structural challenge, which essentially relates to the road surface conditions and to a certain extent road safety. The second is the design challenge, which essentially is the challenge that exists because of poorly designed roads. The third is the technical challenge, which is associated to the technology on which autonomous vehicles rely on, more specifically mapping technology. The fourth is the cost challenge. So the situation now is that 15% of national budget is allocated for national roads, but only 1% is allocated for local/rural roads. And seeing how that 80% of the road network in the UK comprises of rural roads, the problem therefore is that there's not enough funding to maintain and to repair these roads. And last but not least, the social challenge. So the reported statistics have shown that a lot of elderly people do have difficulties traveling to places such as the hospital due to lack of access or comfort or convenience of public transport. So clearly there's scope for autonomous vehicles to fill in the gaps, but the issue might be how well it might be accepted by the population because of how new and how foreign it is. So first we'll go through the structural challenge. As we said before, it's about the road surface conditions. So that relates to potholes, to cracks. And according to Cycling UK, since 2013, £72 million has been spent in compensation and legal costs for accidents that are associated with cycling. So clearly there is value in investing in the maintenance and also repair of potholes because it's reflected in road safety and subsequently the cost. So what we believe is that by maintaining existing road infrastructure, we would have already provided for the future because not only vehicles and buses and cyclists can benefit from it, but also in autonomous vehicles will inadvertently as well benefit from them. The design challenge. So there potentially would be a number of road components that would be influenced in order to support autonomous driving. There are three that we've identified. The first is road geometry. So seeing how that autonomous driving is expected to be more safe and more efficient, we can think to allow for narrower lanes, narrower shoulder widths, or even shorter stopping sight distance, or even the potential removal of medians. For road markings, we probably would need to consider a new type of material so that's detectable by autonomous vehicles, or even signs that potentially need to adopt unique shapes to allow for block recognition or for barcodes so they can be scanned. But we do realize that this is all heavily dependent on the level of detail that digital mapping would have at that time, and if we can capture all of this digitally. And if we can, we wouldn't need to rely as much on physical infrastructure. In terms of the technical challenge, there are a number of research done in the UK, but there's two specific ones that are relevant for the rural setting. The first is a simulation testing done by Horiba Mira, which involves considering the different scenarios that an autonomous vehicle might experience in a rural area. So how an autonomous vehicle would give priority to another if it's approaching each other on a single lane road. The second is a research done by Dynium Robot, which is to develop cost-effective and fully autonomous tractors to help local farms and their businesses. There's also an interesting research done in MIT to develop a new mapping technology called MapLight, which doesn't depend as much on the extensive mapping database, but instead uses GPS and LiDAR only. The cost challenge to me is probably the most difficult because of the massive disproportion between urban and rural budget. There are obviously some obvious economic benefits, like how if you enhance the link between rural and urban areas, you generate economic growth or time savings. But I think we need to also understand or be a bit apprehensive in understanding how commercial viable it is, and if it might be too expensive for operators to operate. And perhaps we need to consider a different business model as we would in an urban area because the demographic is different. And the social challenge, so autonomous vehicles would require people to embrace a new type of technology. But given the aging population in rural areas, the level of uptake therefore relies on the willingness of people to accept and to interact with these technology. So if we look at the concerns of the elderly population, the top three reported concerns are the lack of knowledge, feeling of inadequacy, and also skepticism about the technology. So I think when we try to roll out something like autonomous vehicle, we need to consider to make sure that it's inclusive so it doesn't put some groups of people out. And so to do that, we should probably consider a more inclusive solution. So instead of depending too heavily on smartphones to be connected to autonomous vehicles, perhaps we should try to think about how we can introduce this, how we can allow people to access autonomous vehicles in a way that's more familiar to them, like dial-a-ride scheme or potentially even a cab stand. So that's it. So we've talked a little bit about the UK setting, about how much of it is rural and the population that lives there. The different challenges like the structural design, technical cost, and also the social challenges and how we can address some of these things. So thank you for this opportunity to present to you.